being indigenous, what rights should that grant us on this land?
So indigeneity has a right to self-determination, but self-determination is expressed in different ways. So when it comes to the Native American or Native Canadian tribes, the First Nations, they don't believe in creating a country, because in their ideology, in their identity, in their expression of who they do not believe that man owns the land. They believe that actually the land owns the man. So they don't seek to create a country. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, America is on native land. What, you're going to destroy America? They're like, no, they just want access to their native reservations and to be left alone. That's what they seek to achieve. Now, when it comes to Tibetans or Jews, we have different aspirations. We actually had a civilization. We actually want a country, whether that be a state or a kingdom or whatever it exists. Back then it was a kingdom. Obviously, kingdoms today are not really in tune with our culture and the way we've evolved, but we want a civilization that is structured in our own way. So every native population, indigenous population, needs to be able to express themselves that is in tune to who they are. Now, the conversation often leads to, well, Palestinians live here, aren't they indigenous as well? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is no, because if Jews living in Saudi Arabia, let's say you had Jews living there for 500,000 years, would that make them indigenous to Saudi Arabia? And the answer is no. Just
Right.
because white South Africans living in South Africa are not indigenous to South Africa. White people in America, although they have a right to live there equally as individuals, collectively, they are not indigenous to the Americas. The Native Americans are. The Jews are. The people originally from South Africa are. So when it comes to Arabs that have poured into the land, they should have equal rights, because every human being deserves equal rights no matter where they live. But their collective connection to the land is not the same collective connection as the native people, because they are the descendants of foreigners that had migrated and moved into the land through colonial migration. And their culture is Arabic. They speak Arabic. They pray towards Mecca. They have the same family names as families in Saudi Arabia and families in Egypt. They descend from this population. Now, yes, there were also a minority of Jews that were Arabized and were forcibly converted to Islam that have poured into this mix. But me and you both know that our native culture, if the mother is not Jewish, the children are not Jewish. So just because a few people a few thousand years ago were Arabized and forcibly converted does not mean that the vast majority of this population is any different in its collective and connection to Arabia. So I fully believe that Palestinians deserve full equal human rights here, and their form of aspiration is actually different than the aspiration of Jews. They care more about local control. They want their village to be controlled by their leader, and not necessarily caring about this domestic control. They care less about this because this was never a reality for them. Even under the British Mandate or the Ottoman Empire or previous empires that were controlling of this land, they govern themselves locally. There would be that one family and that one family leader that would control the village. And that's how they want to live. And I think we can create a symbiosis between the way that they want to live and govern themselves and express themselves and the way Jews want to govern themselves, express themselves, and build a civilization that is one civilization without walls, not physically, not psychologically, that allows equal access, equal rights, equal resources, equal education, and allows us to be who we are living in this land.
I'm not sure I fully agree that they don't have the same collective connection to the land. It's true that it doesn't go back historically as much, but the majority of a person's connection to the land is within their own lifetime. So let's even say you're first generation Palestinian, right? Let's say, and there's not many of these, because it's been hard to move. It's been hard for a Palestinian to move back since 48, but let's just say you're first generation. You're living in the only home you've ever you've only known, and you're taught in school about your deep connection to this land. That is enough psychologically to make you feel a connection to the land, probably very similar to what we feel. It's true that we could try to debate and say, but we have more history, but the psychological feeling is probably not so different. And we know that we could see this in practice by how much passion we see from the Palestinian people, how adamant they are about having their own land. So, and through struggle that becomes stronger, that feeling for wanting independence becomes stronger. And we know the Palestinian struggle didn't start in 48. It started with the Ottomans. There was Palestinians. Yeah, they weren't called Palestinians there, but the Arabs living here protested the Ottomans. They then protested the British. They then protested the Israelis. So it's true that we could try to compare, who has more connection, but in the psyche of a Palestinian compared to the psyche of an Israeli, I'm sure it's pretty similar to how we feel. And I think that's where most of the weight should be given, for how the people living here feel and how they think. Because the historical context, again, there's we don't fully know all the history, but there's also a lot of like subjectivity to how important each aspect of history is. Like how much weight do we give first civilization? How much weight do we give the generations Palestinians have been here? It's just, it's not a discussion or a philosophy that is resilient or scalable, because it's so up for interpretation. So I try to look at like solutions that are more, like I said, resilient and scalable, and those are ones that we could both agree on. So, you know, when you teach Palestinians how important this land is to you, and part of the way you do that is by sharing with them the history, that can appeal to them. And we've seen this appeal to them. You and I both have had many conversations with Palestinians, and we've been able to convince them that, you know, this land's important to us. But I don't think we could ever convince a Palestinian that we have more right to this land than them. It seems like an uphill battle, not worth fighting, and just bringing us farther away from finding common ground. I'd rather look at things, you know, through the lens of humanism. We are all living here on this land. We all love this land. We have a history here. You have a history here. Our histories are different, but still, we all love this land. Therefore, we all have the right to live here. I feel like that's a way more unified and just scalable approach to this. Do you have any issues with viewing things that way?
Yeah, so first of all, I never talk about it in the terms of we have more, you have less, but we have a different relationship with the land and we have different aspirations. That's how I talk about it. I'm someone that's very much so against double standards. And I notice them immediately when they're put against the Jewish people, because that's a form of anti-Semitism, is holding a double standard, particularly to the Jewish people, whereas other nations, you hold them to different standards. And again, examples, if you take a Jewish population, which have spread across the world, and they tomorrow decide to identify as indigenous to that land and are taught, like you say, in schools and psychologically think that they are native, thus they need to take a piece of Northeast India and creating a Jewish state, and take a piece of Ethiopia and create a state, and take a piece of America and Argentina and France and Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia and Yemen and Saudi Arabia and wherever you have Jews, just because we feel like we have a right doesn't give you a right.